Hello everybody! You have just embarked on an epic journey to learn about Greek mythology on the gods Poseidon, Zeus, and Odysseus.
My friends Anthony, Jake, and I have each researched a different god for you people today. I am doing Zeus, Jake is doing Poseidon.
And Anthony is doing Odysseus.
Minutes or under for each god.
Poseidon was one of the three most powerful Greek gods, the other two being Zeus and Hades. He was the god of the sea, but what many don't know is that he was also the god of navigation, earthquakes, and fertility. His name in Greek translates to husband, which is a very fitting name because he had quite a few children, including Triton, Orion, Polyphemus, Peleus, and many others, like Percy Jackson in the book Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. He is conceded the nickname Earthshaker because when he slams his trident to the ground, the earth shakes in an earthquake. He was also very unstable in his personality. He had a bad temper, and it often resulted in violence.
Wow, that's sad for a god.
Don't make me come over there! Poseidon fought with a few other gods, one of them being Athena, the goddess of wisdom. He fought with her over possession of Athens. Poseidon made it spring in the city to try to win over the people. However, Athena gave them the olive tree, and she won, as you can tell, because it is yelled Athens and not Poseidon's. Poseidon liked to travel by chariot and by the sea. He and Medusa conceived the flying horse, Pegasus. Although he relied on chariots and the sea, Athena invented both chariots and boats. Darn Athena. That is it!
Zeus is one of the most powerful Greek gods there is. He's the god of the sky and can control lightning. He's also part of the big three of Greek gods, along with Hades and Poseidon.
Poseidon!
Zeus! Anyway, Zeus.
Poseidon!
Zeus! Like I was saying, was the last child of Titans Cronus and Rhea. Cronus was told that one of his children was going to overthrow him. To keep this from happening, Cronus swallowed all of his kids with the exception of Zeus, who managed to avoid being eaten. After that, he became king of Mount Olympus. Zeus shared the rule of the world with Poseidon and Hades. The children of Cronos, which are the other fellow gods, were full of admiration for Zeus and sided with him against their father. Zeus mated with many, many goddesses and mortals. He was married to his sister Hera. Hera is the Greek goddess of marriage, women, childbirth, and family. Zeus was a carefree god who loved to laugh. He was known as wise, prudent, merciful, and fair. He was easily angered and had a thunderous temper, and was very destructive. He hurled lightning bolts and caused many storms on Earth.
My god was Odysseus. He's a demigod from Ithaca. He had to leave his family for over 10 years, a lot more than 10 years, to go fight in the Trojan War. When the Trojan War was almost over, Odysseus and his men had to get inside of Troy, but they couldn't because the wall was too tall and they couldn't go over or under it. So they had to build a wooden horse, and it must have been at least 2 stories high. And they filled it with their best warriors, including Odysseus, and they waited until nightfall until the Trojans came out and took the horse, and they led it into Troy. Once the Trojans took the wooden horse inside of their city, they celebrated because they thought the war was over. So they celebrated by having a feast, and it included much wine. So they passed out a couple hours later, and when all the Trojans were asleep, Odysseus and his men snuck out of the horse and killed the soldiers, and they lit the city on fire. That ended the war of the Trojans. After the war was over, they had to begin their way back. Their first stop was at Ismarus, which they were the allies of the Trojans, so they wanted to get revenge on them. Odysseus had 12 ships and 600 men. When they got to Ismarus, they saw no soldiers, no natives, no people at the shore, so they decided to land their ships and have a feast. They ate lots of different kinds of foods, and they had tons of alcohol, which ended up in them getting drunk, and they fell asleep. The next morning, they woke up to being attacked by the natives. Out of the 600 men that they started out with, 72 resulted in death. After they got handle of all of the natives, they got their ships out, luckily, and they were back on their way to Ithaca. This is the beginning of the story of the Odyssey. As they were traveling back to Ithaca, a hurricane rolled around, and it landed them in the island of the Lotus Eaters. The Lotus Eaters ate tons of lotus, which is basically a drug which makes you want to feel happy. It gives you a release. Most of Odysseus' soldiers ate the lotus, and they wanted to stay forever, but Odysseus was the only one who didn't eat the lotus, and he got them out of there in time before they could stay too long. After they left the island, they mistakenly landed in the island of the Cyclops. After the Cyclops was very drunk and he couldn't pay attention to anything, Odysseus and his men took one of their swords and stabbed the Cyclops in the eye, blinding him. The Cyclops went around in pain, and he was just walking around trying to look for the men, which he couldn't look anymore because he's blind. And they decided to leave the island, and they were back on their way back to Ithaca.
I bet you didn't see that coming.
They ended up on the island of Edea. They saw the god Aeolus, who is the god of winds, and they asked for help to get home. And Aeolus gave them a bag of winds containing all the winds that could set them off course. Now, approaching Ithaca, their hometown, and just about to come home, they could see the shoreline, but Odysseus, he was leading his men the entire way, non-stop, and he never slept. And as they came up towards the shore, he finally decided he has to go to sleep for a little bit. And his men never figured out what was in the bag, which was containing the bag of winds, and they thought it was some kind of gold or other rich material. So they decided to open the bag, and it released tons of wind that blew them way out of course, out of Ithaca, way out of Ithaca, and back out into sea. Odysseus disguises himself as a beggar, and he enters the competition. No other person is able to string his bow and shoot an arrow, except for Odysseus, who goes last. He strings his bow with no problems at all, and shoots the arrow perfectly through each of the 12 axes, and hits the target perfectly. He takes off what his disguise is, which is a cloak, and nobody else can recognize him except for Penelope. They decide to have a feast of his return, only him and Penelope. As a final test, Penelope asks him where he should move his bed, which Penelope is sitting on right now. And Odysseus says, "You can't move the bed because I built it in a tree trunk. You can't move it. It's impossible." And Penelope is very satisfied with him because she is the only one who would know that, because no one else is allowed in Penelope's room. And after all of this long journey, this has been the story of the Odyssey.
Catch 'em all.